All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are covering Wolverine versus Predator. And as far as I'm aware, this is the first time that Marvel's ever published a story like this. So, much like all the other stories that have ever existed in the history of comic books, where it's like Alien versus whoever, or Predator versus whoever, it's just the kind of general assumption that people are aware of their existence. They've always kind of been there. We're just now seeing a story where they encounter someone. So, what this does here, because honestly, you guys care about the fighting, you guys don't care about the setup, there's a few things that go on here. First and foremost, the Predator does arrive on Earth, right? And when it shows up here, it does what most Predators would do when they get to a new planet. They start going after the indigenous life. Now, it's not to like destroy them, right? Or at least eradicate all life. It's to really just kind of figure out what the hierarchy is, right? Like starting with the first thing it attacks and going from there. So the first thing it does is it kills like an elk, right? Or a deer, or whatever this thing happens to be. I can never tell the difference between them, to be honest with you. But then after that, it goes after like a mountain lion, it goes after a mountain goat, it goes after an orca, right? Just these different things that seem to have different levels of strength or durability. And a lot of it is just based on observation, right? That's really all it is. And then it notices off in the distance, there is smoke emanating from a local village. Now, at that point, we switch over to Wolverine. Now, this takes place, and one of the things to know with the miniseries, this is 4 issues long, it's gonna span 4 months, and each issue will take place at different points in Wolverine's life. This one takes place in the very early days, right after he had like popped his claws and his traditional origin, and then taken off to the Northwest Territories to live up there in Northern Canada, and especially up in Alaska, right? So by and large, he's removed from most of society, but he's still pretty young. So he does not have adamantium claws yet, right? It's just bone. But he ends up coming across a guy named Tucker. And Tucker is basically like a prospector, right? Who made himself rich out there. And then some rival faction ended up kidnapping his son and so on and so forth. So he basically hires Wolverine to like track these guys down and try to kill them. The issue is that once they get to where these guys are supposed to be, they find them all hung upside down and skinned, which again is normal when you're dealing with a predator, right? It's like one of the hallmarks of predators entirely. And it even takes Tucker by surprise, right? He's kind of like, what in the heck? But then they end up coming across a house, and that's where these guys are supposed to be laying low. Now, while this happens, the predator sees Wolverine and then stands back and watches, because Wolverine, even in these early days, just had an extreme level of ferocity, right? The Berserker Rage hadn't quite become a core part of his character, but he was getting there. But having that level of ferocity, the Predator's just kind of like, okay, this is dope. This guy might be a challenge. Wolverine goes in there and slaughters everyone, right? And then in turn, he's shot in the back by Tucker. Come to find out, the whole story about his son was a lie. That these guys were all people that were working with Tucker in like a railroad heist. Then they turned on him and they took the money for themselves. So he hired Wolverine to kill these guys so he could take the money for himself. He goes to leave, and then he gets his head blown off by the Predator, which is amazing. It's absolutely awesome. And then the Predator, of course, as we know from just their experience on any indigenous world, specifically Earth, they overhear things and they kind of start learning in the process. So it starts talking, right? Like they're killers, they're monsters, just kind of repeating the phrase over and over again. And then the fight breaks out between himself and Wolverine. And this thing is intense, right? It is amazing, right? Wolverine literally like rips this guy's mask off, or really just kind of slashes his throat. Then he pulls his mask off. And then Wolverine's like, whatever you are, I'm gonna carve the ugly off of you, right? And the fight is pretty hardcore. And in fact, when Wolverine goes to attack this thing, it cuts his claws off, right? On one of his hands, cuts him right off, right? So Wolverine starts to realize just how big of a threat this guy is. In turn, it impales him, right? Stabs Wolverine through the chest, and then Wolverine, having gotten the slash on him, it's kind of the opening salvo, right? In a lot of ways, it's just one testing the other to see what they're capable of. Wolverine, of course, just takes off running with this spear stuck in his body, pulls the thing out, and then his healing factor starts to kick in. And it's really, really cool, right? The narration is like, we were both cut deep and we both had our own ways of healing. Of course, Wolverine has this healing factor, the Predator has technology. And so it's awesome as like they're both healing and recovering, because eventually the Predator catches up to Wolverine. Now, one of the funny things he says, I was young, but I'd seen more than my share of blood and trouble. This thing though was on another level. I wasn't one to run from a fight, but I knew if I was going to win this one, I needed to move fast and think smart, or I'd be just another bloody ornament hung from a tree. And so even when he's trying to get away, it's not one of those where he's like running out of fear. It's a Sun Tzu art of war type thing. When encountering an enemy, fight them on the terrain that's most familiar to you. So even when this smart disc is thrown and it like stabs Wolverine in the leg, he's able to get away and get back to his cave, only for the Predator to jump in the way and try to block him from getting out of this thing. Now, when that happens, this bear immediately comes out of the cave and attacks the Predator. Now, here's what's so cool about this. When Wolverine was out there in the wild, honestly, he made friends with animals more than he made friends with people because he didn't like people, right? That's just one of the core elements of his character in the early days. He didn't like humanity. It was really not a fear or anything. It was really more of like a distaste, right? Exhaustion, frustration, things like that. He saw human beings as being more trouble than they're worth. So he was basically everybody in their 30s going forward in the modern era. But the thing about this is that when he was making friends, he actually kind of had like a bear as not really a pet, but more of like a companion, and the bear attacks. And this is when Wolverine doesn't fully understand what he's dealing with. A bear is a formidable foe, but the Predators are ridiculously dense, right? Just in terms of their body structure, they're incredibly capable. So this is Wolverine underestimating what he's facing off against, because in this moment, instead of like following in with the bear and killing the Predator, he celebrates the moment, right? He celebrates what's going on here. And in turn, he of course pulls the smart disc out of his leg and then just kind of continues on. Then he just sort of walks away, but he has this really amazing monologue, right? He says, "I thought that was the end. There was always some new danger waiting for me, so I soon turned my attention to it. It's easy to forget pain when your wounds heal like dried up creeks. What I didn't realize, not until many years later, was that this was just the beginning of what turned out to be the longest hunt of both of our miserable lives." Because what it does is it time skips, it jumps forward to South America, and it picks up with Professor Thornton and Team X. Now, for those of you guys who don't know anything about Team X and about Wolverine's history, it's one of the coolest things. So a little bit of history here. Before Wolverine became Wolverine, which is to say having the adamantium bonded to his skeleton and all that kind of stuff, he was part of a wet work team that worked with the CIA. And the idea behind this is they were like sent out on all kinds of missions. I mean, these guys toppled governments, they killed dictators, they took out like political rivals, I mean, anything, drug lords, the whole 9 yards. Like, sometimes crazy. There's stories where these guys would go into a place and just kill 30 people just to get to one guy, right? Like, I mean, it's nuts. Other times they would go in with just surgical precision, but it was nuts how capable these guys were. But this is the team, not directly, but this is a team that would eventually go on to become part of Weapons Plus, right? Weapon X, the group that had adamantium bonded to them, or at least the healing factor of Wolverine granted to them. Now, Jackson and Cruel, they were not part of the team for Weapons Plus. That was, oh my God, that was Silver Fox and someone else. I don't think it was Kestrel or Mastodon. Maybe it was. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been 20 years since I read those comics, guys. Bear with me here. I may have forgotten a little bit. But the thing about this is that this team is ridiculously dangerous. But once they get in there, right? Once they get to their location in South America, being sent on this mission, the kind of monologue we get is he says, "When you've lived as long and as hard as I have, memories get broken and scrambled. There are times I can remember as clear as a picture. There are other times that feel like I'm looking at myself through the wrong end of a telescope. And there are other times that are gone altogether." And he says, "Thanks to Professor Thornton, after so many mind wipes, after so much training that honed my nerves to a razor's edge, I was less a mutant and more of an arsenal back then." And he says, "Our intel told us a guerrilla force was planning a coup. A former general was storing weapons and rallying support from a jungle stronghold. We were supposed to make sure he never came into power. Everything was sleepy and quiet at dawn. once we took out the sentry, it would be easy pickings, right? They get into this place and they find everybody's been skinned, right? So it's like a throwback to the original Predator from Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is awesome, right? And he says, or so we thought, something triggered deep inside my brain, a lost memory of a monster in the woods, of a first and final hunt. I might have forgotten about the Predator, but he had not forgotten about me. And this time, he brought reinforcements. So unlike their first encounter where it's Wolverine fighting 1, now he's fighting 4. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. We will see you guys in a month for part 2. I know it's gonna suck to have to wait. And I will catch you all later. Peace.